Hi, I'm Saloni Kanani, and I had the opportunity to interview Claudia De Vasco, who is the current executive artistic director of the Public Theater of San Antonio. Before her time and tenure in the theater in San Antonio, she was in Los Angeles for about 15 years, where she did a lot of equity and diversity work as well as accent coaching. She is currently in the works of organizing the next year's schedule for the theater. And um, in the interview, I ask a lot of questions about what it means to be Latinx and how does that identity and being a woman affect the works in theater. To begin with, I just want to know, could you tell me a little bit about your childhood and your background and what your upbringing was like?
Sure. So I am first generation Mexican American. I know lots of people describe what that is in different ways. For me, it means that I'm the first generation in my family to be born here. So, oh, there's my husband in the background. You're on a recording, just so you know. Okay. Working remote. This is what we do. Um, I grew up in Texas. Both my parents were born in Mexico, even though my mom was already a US citizen. So my dad was an immigrant and they moved over here when my dad got into grad school. Um, and it was, I grew up in Texas, where in the most diverse city in the country. So Houston, they say, is more diverse than New York City. And I really found that to be true. I was fortunate to be brought up with a Black mayor, and CEOs of companies in the town, in the city, were Latino and Indian and Asian American. And so I think that contributed to my ability to, um, I was able to dream big because I didn't feel limited by my identity. I will say, my parents are a good version of the American dream. They were both dirt poor, Mexico, and my mom grew up in San Antonio and Houston, and they both worked really, really hard to get to where they were, and work in business. So by the time my mom had me and my sister, she didn't get any opportunities. Like, she didn't get to do any extracurriculars. She didn't get to go her prom. She didn't get to, walk for graduation. So with my sister and I, she was like, I just want you all to have all the opportunities. And I grew up in church singing and playing instruments. So she found other opportunities for me to sing and to dance. And she was the one behind really pushing my beginning in the arts, because at like 4 years old, she found me dance classes and she found me some kids theater programs. I was also doing other things. She just wanted to make sure we always had something to do so we weren't getting in trouble. And then she found public schools here in Texas, arts middle school and an arts high school, and helped me get into those. And I think those are really what kicked off my career, because that's when I started training. Um, and I had a good childhood. I have my own therapy things that I'd like to complain about. We all have some sort of trauma or thing that we're dealing through, but in general, I'm really thankful for my childhood. My parents have been supportive of the career. I would say the hardest part was leaving high school and going to acting school in the Midwest,
Yeah.
where I was faced with prejudice. And suddenly I was like, wait a minute, I'm different. You guys don't think I'm from the US? What? Because I went from being in the most diverse city in the country to being somewhere where I was the complete other. Nobody else was like me. Nobody was bilingual. Nobody, really knew of a Latina who was as connected with her culture as I am, but wasn't an immigrant or didn't have an accent. So they didn't know what to do with me.
Right.
And that played out in my actor training program too.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, I know myself, like also living here, I grew up in Shanghai and
Oh,
incredibly
wow.
diverse expat city. And then I think coming here, um, going to college, I expected people to have a very diverse background. And it was like one of the first times where I was like, oh, okay. Like, not everyone is as open-minded and has like a diverse upbringing. But yeah, I
It's, I felt that way in LA too. I was like, people think it's diverse here, or was there when I was living there, because I
yeah,
just moved 2 months ago. But yeah, when I was living in LA, everyone was like, it's so diverse. I'm like,
no.
And the diversity that's there is segregated.
Yeah.
Everyone is in their own communities or groups.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess this kind of leads to my second question, which was, was there anything distinct in your childhood that inspired you to pursue um, being in the art field in theater and doing the work you are doing today?
Yeah. I think partly it is that my mom helped identify those passions in me and then supported that with providing me with classes and stuff. But my dad also always really raised me um, believing that I should be following what my passion is and that I should pursue that. I think secretly he hoped I was going to be a doctor or a lawyer. But even when he was hoping those things, he was saying, if this is your passion, then you should do it. Um, but then I think what helped propel me specifically into the career is in high school. So when I was applying to colleges, I couldn't decide, like, should I study the arts or should I um, go into politics and government? That was the other way I was going to go. And I had done a lot of political programs in school where I would go to DC in the summer and, these summer programs. And I asked my senator and I asked my representative on Capitol Hill, hey, what do I do to get to where you are? If I want to be in politics, do I need to study pre-law? What's the deal? And without fail, they all said, do what you love in undergraduate. Unless, of course, what you love is, you need to be a doctor or engineer. You have to get an undergraduate degree that fits that you love. And then if you want to run for office later, you find your community, you find your way to that. You go to grad school, but you don't have to, you're 18, like
Yeah.
you'll figure it out. So I said, thank you. And I'm like, then I'm going to study theater. And I think that's what really um, helped me make that choice.
Right. So were you involved in like theater productions throughout high school or like middle school that like, gave you that spark and made you realize that that was the passion that you wanted to follow versus, going into the office?
Well, it was all throughout high school because I went to the high school for performing and visual arts in Houston. It's also where like Beyonce went, and it's where I'm
Wow.
trying to think of like other people who went to that high school. Patrick Swayze went there. Um, the Black actress in Grey's Anatomy who plays the doctor, I forget her name, she went there. Um, my friend who was in my class, Justin Simeon, he is the creator of Dear White People, and now he's also like the directing Star Wars. He was in my acting class in high school. So we've got like, the guy, do you know what WordPress is?
Yeah.
Like the blog site, that
Yeah.
guy went to my high school. He was there. I was in a science class with him. Like, so that I was in tons of productions because I was a theater major. And
Right.
so half the day was spent doing theater and musicals and everything. But even so, I was still doing politics through high school. So I think the turning point was really at the beginning of my senior year, having asked my representatives. And then that year I was going, yeah, I'm gonna make this what I study.
Right. Wow. So it seems like you had just like a lot like of theater just going and going and going, which yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, a lot of people left my school and didn't pursue it. My best
right.
friend, she's a lawyer, and I have another friend, and she's a dog. They did not pursue theater out of our program, but it certainly was what, as a kid, I just thought it was a bunch of fun musicals, entertainment, and it was high school where we had acting classes and theater classes that I learned that it was a career and that I could have a future in it.
Right. So then I guess Did you always know from a young age that you wanted to be in the arts, even before the high school that you were in? Did you just know that this was something you wanted to do since you sang, with the church and playing instruments and dancing? So was that drive just always there to pursue theater as a child?
I think because of the way my parents raised me with the arts, and I should say my parents didn't raise me with the arts in the privileged sense. Like we didn't go to theater, we didn't go to the symphony or anything like that. But I was always around music, and then I was in dance class, and there was dancing at family stuff. And then my mom is the one who discovered theater for me. So I think I always knew that the arts were a part of my life. But early on, I had dreams of being a lawyer, interior designer, or running for office. So I I think that what really gelled for me was that it's tricky because I have a lot of friends in LA who they had this switch. Like I've been a lawyer 10 years and I realized it's not my passion. And they quit being a lawyer and now they're being an actor. And I never had that moment because the arts were always a part of it. And
Mm,
it wasn't, and I would say that even my last 15 years in LA, because of my struggles being a woman and a Latina, I was constantly saying, I'm getting out. Like this isn't working.
yeah,
Um, and now I am where I am, but it took 20 years of like sticking with it.
yeah,
So, it's a tricky answer. I don't know
yeah,
that moment. I always knew I'd be performing in some way.
yeah.
I didn't know. I think by the time I was in senior and high school, I knew that someday I would be an artistic director of a theater.
That's amazing.
I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I knew.
You
I knew
manifested it, that constant.
I did.
So I was just reading a bit about you and your establishments, and it seems like, there's a lot of work that you yourself have done to find new and improved solutions to the diversity and equality problems in the theater field. And so, just as a Latina and a woman of color, can you just speak a little bit about that and the work that you did with this improvement and equality? Um, in the field, and what were like the challenging parts to it, and
Are
what
you
did
specifically talking about the public theater, or do you mean um, just so that I can know where to start? Or
I
were
think
you?
I'm talking about like the public theater and like a little bit of the works that you did, I think in LA
Got it.
with those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, being a woman and being Latina is an intersectional double whammy because already theater and TV film is a man's industry still. And then on top of that, Latinas get, I mean, at least in TV film, we're the least represented of any demographic in all the United States, which is nuts to me. And we also get paid the least on the dollar of any other demographic.
Right.
Um, and I think I had I think in my 20s it worked for me because I surprised people,
Hmm.
because they were like, wait, you're smart and young. And so they wanted to push me along. But by the time like I was in my late 20s and early 30s, people would just, I don't know, they weren't as surprised, or they would sort of first dismiss, and then I would have to prove myself even harder. And I started getting to the point where I was thinking, like, do I need to go back and get a master's in something, or do I need to, leave, or what's going on? How can I be working as hard as some of my white counterparts and not be getting ahead? And it's not, I really would also take the time, step back and ask myself, well, Claudia, check yourself. Like, are you trying hard enough? And I'm like, actually, yeah, I'm pretty audacious. I'd call up theaters and be like, I want to direct at your theater. And they'd be like, but then I'd see someone new and it's a white guy and they just sort of shuffled them in, or I, I would audition for someone for 10 years and she never remembered me. And in my brain, I'm like, okay, well, maybe they weren't good auditions, until 10 years later, when I auditioned for a role that was super specific, like for me, And then she was like, oh my God, where did you come from? You're so amazing. I'm just like, you've known me for 10 years, but you just could never think outside the box because I was auditioning for these diverse parts. But until she could only see my talent when she saw me through her stereotype.
Yeah.
And I just said, well, I don't want to be putting up with that. So all that combined with my work in TV film when I was an accent coach, and accent coaching, language is so connected to the way we perceive people and the way people are discriminated against. And, um, there's this exclusive feeling in this country about who gets to be an expert at English.
Yeah.
And I'll say that it's not someone that looks like me, right? And so to try to then be an accent coach, to push my way through, first of all, to say, hey, I can coach anything. Well, they're already like, no, you can coach the Latino stuff. But even the Latino stuff, they wouldn't offer to me first. They'd offer it to the white coaches.
Oh my gosh.
And so they'd be coaching everything. And I would be like, well, you're already putting me in this niche, but you're also not giving those to me. The biggest movie I coached, a huge movie, bunch of celebrities, it was through a referral because another actor that I worked with was like, Claudia's right for this. I found out while I was on set that my agent had offered her another white coach and put her forward. And they were like, no, we need someone bilingual and who understands the culture. And she didn't even put me forward. She didn't even like submit me. She was just like, okay, well, this is the one I had offered you. And so I got that job on my own. And eventually I left my agent because I'm like, I'm getting all these jobs on my own. You're not even helping. She would only give jobs to her white coaches. So the whole thing with George Floyd happened in the industry. And one thing that really frustrates me is having conversations that go nowhere.
Yeah.
I love being part of panels and stuff, but at the end, I'm always like, what are the actions? What's the to-do list? What are we doing? Yeah. Because if we're not doing anything, this is pointless. And so after George Floyd and all the stuff happened with diversity in the country and people putting out their statements, I finally decided to speak out against dialect coaching. And I was like, I need everyone to know what it's like. Like when you're hearing these accents on screen and you think, wow, that's a terrible Puerto Rican accent. It's probably because a white person coached them. And let me tell you, West Side Story is coached by a white man. And I'm just like, it's 2021. Really? What is happening? And I'm just like, this is not okay. So I got together with my friend Aurora, who owns this agency, and we said, let's come up with some real solutions. Like, what do people need to do diversity better? And we started working on back end stuff. So for example, we said, okay, with the accent coaches, let's represent them and we're going to place them fairly. But we're also going to put a certain level of education of helping people understand that accent coaching isn't just about teaching sound, it's about cultural sensitivity and cultural consulting. And we'll also rep cultural consultants so that when sets are dealing with different cultures, that they hire people who can advise. So they're not just, thinking, oh, let's do this diverse story, but then it's still all white people telling it. Right. And then finally, what happens when people get on set? Because the stories we kept hearing were of people being re-traumatized. And they would get on set and they would go, here I am. They've worked their hardest. And then now they're being like talked down to or shut up or whatever. The Black women aren't getting the right hair people, even though they asked for them. But people are feeling afraid to speak up because we've all worked so hard to get there that we don't want to rock the boat, and we don't want to be labeled problematic. So we said, let's create a position that basically helps people do the diversity part better, has someone advocate for them, help set the stage. So if a person with disabilities or a different ability comes to set, before they get there, they go, let's check out the space to see how things are, so that person doesn't feel othered because we're always having to move out of the way for their wheelchair or whatever. Or if a trans person or a non-binary person comes to set, let's make sure everyone knows their pronouns. And let's make sure that everybody discusses pronouns so that they're not the only person that has to identify that way. Yeah. So we started doing this work. And, in the time that I was doing it, I think it was making some changes, and Aurora's still doing that work. But certainly when I got hired to do this job, now I get to apply it to my theater company. And, everything from one of the first things I did was do a walkthrough of the theater for accessibility. There's an actor in a wheelchair I'd like to hire. Let me get a tissue. And the theater isn't built for him.
Yeah.
So we put together a plan, and there's all these other things we have to do. And I've been going to City Hall and speaking at city meetings to try to get money to fix the theater so that I can hire people with different abilities.
Yeah.
And, you know, teaching teaching our staff how to consciously cast and pick a season, and trying to make some internal organizational moves that have at the center inclusion and diversity. Like, how do we ensure that we're doing it, that it's at the forefront, that it's not just something we're kind of trying to do? And also, how do I educate? And one of the first things I had to do, unfortunately, I did not want to do this so soon. So when I got the job really fast in like August. We moved here early September. And the first thing I did is the season is already underway. So I didn't choose any of these shows, which is kind of hard because people are already judging me as the leader, but these aren't my shows. So I'm like, that's okay. But I came in and I said, let me read all these plays in case they're racist or something.
Yeah.
And sure enough, the first play that I was going to be with my name on it was problematic. I was like, oh my God, like I can't put my name on this. And so we worked with our publishing company for 1 month to try to get permission, even if it was just to delete the song. Pardon me, I have a cold. Change the words or something.
Yeah.
And the playwright never got back to them. I don't know if the playwright didn't care. He was on vacation. I don't know. He's got to be in his 80s by now, this playwright. So maybe he just doesn't agree. And I had made the hard decision of canceling the show.
Okay, yeah.
And within a week, we wrote another one.
Okay.
And it was intense, but that's the kind of decision that I felt like, okay, well, at least they get to see what I'm about. That I'm not just going to talk about diversity and then go put problematic shows on the stage. Like, this is not, and the thing I keep saying is I've been involved in all these diversity conversations and anti-racism conversations. And at the end of the conversation, the conclusion is always, we should stop producing those shows.
Yeah.
That's always what the conclusion is. Just don't do those shows anymore. There are other plays, there are other shows. So I said, I can't, because people were saying, well, why couldn't we have a conversation about it? Because the conclusion is going to be, don't do the show.
Yeah.
And so I already know that conclusion, and I'm just going to cancel it. And there were people that were pissed, and they have to get over it.
No, that takes a lot. It takes a lot of courage to be able to do that. But it's like, if this is what you're about, this is what you're preaching, you did it. And that's more powerful than, having conversations that lead nowhere. That would have just been that. And that's what so many companies and things industries like, we just won't do it next time. Or
but we're going to keep the show up, but this conversation's great and we're always trying. I'm like, no, just cancel the dang show.
Yeah. And then you guys just wrote another one in a week.
Yeah. I was like, let me think about it. Yes, we did. Now, to be fair, it's a musical review. It's not a full-blown musical.
Well, still,
a little easier, but yeah, we sure. And it's actually good.
Okay, what's it called?
It's called Season's Greetings from San Antonio, because we said, look, if we have to keep the same cast because of our equity requirements, and if we're canceling a show that's problematic, that makes people feel unwelcome, then what if we include everybody? Let's really reflect what the holidays in San Antonio look like, and try to reflect our population. Now, San Antonio, Texas is 70% Latinx. Our theater audience is probably like 60% to 70% white. So it doesn't make sense. We're like, this city is majority Latinx.
Yeah.
Like in this city, Mexican American culture is the regular culture. Everybody celebrates this big holiday in the spring called Fiesta, which is an old Texas Mexican celebration. And you could be Black, white, or Latino, everyone's celebrating it. I mean, this city is way more Latin centric than LA ever was for me living there.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
yet our theater is not at all. And so part of the reason they also wanted to hire me is we have to start reflecting our community.
Yeah.
And I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, that's,
It's one thing to have like, you put up a production with a diverse cast and all, but at some point it's like you need to see your audience reflect and mirror the cast in a way that on both ends of it, both ends of the stage, there is diversity, you know. But I do feel like it is also important for perhaps the white population to understand the other side of the stage, the representation, and learn about the culture, and learn about the voices and stories of people of color.
and
Because,
also to see them as universal.
yeah,
Right now, the culture is such that we think white is universal, right? In all the movies, it has all white people. And it's like, well, this is going to be universal. No, it's not universal.
no,
It's that white culture. And now we're starting to talk about what is white culture. I'm married to a white guy, and I'm always talking about like his culture versus my culture. Like it's not just neutral and then I have Mexican. It's there's two separate
yeah,
cultures of how we interact, how we celebrate, how we deal with family. And what I'm trying to do here at this theater is really establish the Latinx experience as universal in the theater because the city already accepts it. This whole city might as well be Mexico. And somehow I'm like, how is the theater so hanging on? But I think it's because, the older people are the donors. That's a certain demographic, and everyone's afraid of losing them. So they do what they want. And I'm going, if we're relying on that small group of people to keep our theater alive, something's wrong. And I need to figure out how we bring in the diverse audiences and the younger audiences. And at some point in my career, maybe 5 years ago, I thought it's not going to happen. Millennials won't go. I'm a millennial myself. We're not going to go. And it's all going to die. And I was like in this dark place. So if it's not going to happen, we're not going to go to theater. We're all going to stay on TikTok, and that's going to be that. And to be fair, I am on TikTok now. But I don't think that's true anymore. I just think we haven't put the right work up or made the right kinds of connections. And at least in our theater. And so that's sort of what I'm trying to do is create this idea that Latinx is universal as well. And so are Black stories and Asian American stories and Asian stories. And so, next year is going to look a little bit different, the season I pick.
okay,
But
yeah.
I'm picking shows that I believe are universal, but they are going to be centered on Latinx culture.
Yeah, because I think that's so true when you mentioned that. Like growing up, I would just, we learn Eurocentric theater, we learn Eurocentric stories. And I remember just growing up trying so hard to relate to those stories. And it just never clicked because that wasn't me on stage, that wasn't me on TV. But I would do everything in my power to try to relate because I was like, that's what's normal, right? Like if this is universal, but it's not universal, and those were not our stories. Or so I think that's amazing for you to want to push that Latinx is universal, and to push for stories and representations of the Latinx population that are not just based on stereotypes.
Yes.
Is what I, even though we've made somewhat progress in the industry as far as now, there's still so many stereotypes. And
What's your cultural background?
so I was born and raised in Shanghai, and but my parents are both Indian. So growing up, I never saw any Indian representation on Disney Channel or whatever, or if there was,
Yeah.
it was like that geeky, nerdy side
Yeah.
character, always the white person's like best friend, or it was the stereotypes. It was the stereotypes. And now we do see like slight representation, but it's definitely not there. So I think it's so incredibly important, the work that you're doing to put out the stories of people that are oftentimes just silenced or just not given the right platforms or just fed into the stereotypes, because then there's just also the whole other thing where it's like, okay, as an artist, I'm trying to also make money and put my name out there. Do I give in to the stereotypical characters to at least start my career, or do I, say no? But then risk not being able to even be in a show. So I think it's just, yeah,
Yeah, those are all hard questions, and you almost have to answer them per project
yeah,
to
I think,
ask yourself what the cost benefit is.
yeah,
And I certainly have had to turn down some work
hmm,
because I felt like it didn't align with my values.
yeah,
And I'm like, how much farther along would I be if I wasn't having to turn down work? Because my white friends aren't turning anything down because it's offensive or doesn't represent them well. They just say yes to everything.
yeah,
And it's frustrating because I'm like, I'm saying no to things and potentially burning bridges. But
yeah. It's just a lot more. We're dealing with a lot more obstacles, rather than just, oh, I didn't get cast because I may not have auditioned as well. But, we're here being like, okay, I probably didn't get cast because of my identity, the way I look, the way I sound, just a whole, like a plethora of reasons.
oh yeah.
But yeah, so I guess I also want to ask, kind of just, I guess, in relation to what we're talking about, do you think your identity as a woman and as a Latina has impacted any of the current changes that you've been trying to make? Um, and has those two identities of being a woman and being, um, having Latinx culture, ever been questioned when you've been trying to make these changes by other people? And I guess you kind of touched on it, when you entered the company and, you were already like the new person trying to, so how did you go about those changes and stand your ground with those two identities?
It's interesting because I think I'm really proud of my board who hired me because they had, I'm the first Latina artistic director of this theater, and there are still only a handful of Latina artistic directors in the country of professional theaters. It's not common. And so I think I don't want to say they took a risk because that sounds like they didn't believe that I could do the job. But in a way, they did. They said, let us break outside of whatever preconceptions or what we were traditionally looking for. And let's really, find the person that's the best for the job that's different than what we expected. And they found me. So I think they're the staff and they are being very supportive.
Okay.
What I'm dealing with is, I still move through the space as a woman and a Latina. And, even just as recently as last week, when I was meeting with some important city folks, one of those people just couldn't talk to me, preferred to talk to my chief development officer, who's a man, but just wouldn't accept that I had answers. And here I was, I'm the boss.
Yeah.
And as soon as that, and so there was that. And I thought, I think that's a woman thing. I think he preferred to talk to women. And then I went to this fancy event where I was meeting a bunch of people. And, this far into my career, I can now tell within the first 5 minutes if someone's just treating me as a person
Mm-hmm.
or if they are dismissing me. And then immediately I start seeing how they relate to other people. Because then I'm like, are they just a terrible person? Or do they treat people of white people or other people differently?
Yeah.
And I was experiencing that. This one important lady, just sort of dismissed me like I didn't matter in a very real way. I mean, I don't know if I can be specific about what she did, but it was just very clear. I was like, oh yeah, you don't think I matter. It didn't matter that I was just presented as the executive artistic director of a theater and my performers were performing and I gave a speech and she just treated me like,
Right.
oh, you know. So I get that. And I've had to, I'm like, okay, that's not my ally. That's not a person that I'm going to waste time uh, trying to change. I'm going to do what I need to do business with that kind of person. So you just start learning who your allies are in the space. And so it still, affects my work. I just feel like I've dealt with it better. And then of course, I know there's a perception too, maybe of some folks in the city, based on the fact that when I canceled that show, I got some letters from community members. And it was clear the perception they had of me. It was, one of them called me an elitist and ignorant and, um, how dare you make these decisions for us? Who do you think you are? And I was like, I'm literally the boss. Like they literally hired me to make these decisions. That's who I think I am. But also I didn't make it by myself. And but I had to ask myself, like, what am I really trying to do? Because I still consider myself an activist, but when I was just an activist, I was like, screw it, I'm going to speak out and call those people out. But now I'm the artistic director of a theater, and those people matter. And maybe I can't convert them, but I can hear them, and I can show them who I really am, which is someone who cares about all people feeling welcome at our theater, including them. But I hope they jump on that same vision and want to welcome other folks with me. And none of them responded to my responses, which I take as a good sign, that I kind of went, look, this person you think I am, like this crazy censoring lady with an agenda, that's not who I am. I am really just trying to make some good change, and you can either be on board or not. And hey, by the way, here's some free tickets. Like, don't even worry about it. I'll refund you your tickets. Come for free. I want to show you that what we're doing is good work.
I think it's like we probably just never had anyone actually make changes. And it's just like shock that, oh, we actually have someone here making the changes that everyone talks about. So I guess it's a good sign that they were probably just like, oh.
Oh, okay. I guess she responded to me. So I think, what's been helping me is to really clarify what my vision for the theater is and to verbalize that. So that people understand what I'm trying to do. And there's never any question. Why I cancel a show, why I make a decision or change. And if I rely on that vision, which is based on the mission of the organization, then, that's what we're all trying to do. And if you don't want to do that, I mean, that's literally what the organization does, or when a nonprofit theater has a mission, that is where, and we all do. I mean, that's how you have to do all your work, is trying to make that mission happen. And if someone says, well, I don't believe in that, then that's great. There are other theaters. I literally can't do anything about it. I'm not going to change the mission. That's
amazing. So I just wanted to know, so what was the reason? Well, I guess like I want to know, was it that you got this offering in the San Antonio company? That's why you left LA, or was that the main reason?
Yeah. In LA, I was working with theater companies. I was working at this agency doing the diversity things for TV film. And I also ran a nonprofit called Emerging Arts Leaders, where I mentored and trained new arts leaders coming out of college to work in the arts, from museums to symphony dance, everything you can think of, theater. And I had just merged that nonprofit with Arts for LA, which is a policy and theater education centered nonprofit. And the thing we kept talking about there is how hard LA has made it for artists to live. I mean, the whole state is hard for anybody to live, but it's really not conducive to artists, because it's, first of all, if an artist wants to create, I don't know if it's gallery space, dance space, theater space, the rent is super high. So the artists already are having trouble just making their art. And then on top of that, they have to pay the high cost of living. And then the whole thing with AB5 happened, where you can't be a gig worker or independent contractor anymore. So everyone has to be paid salaries. it really made it hard to live there. And my husband and I were already going, can we live here? We just had 2 kids. Is the city feasible? And
Yeah.
on top of that, I kept running into these roadblocks in TV. Film was more generous with me, but the theater industry in LA was really tough to break through.
Yeah.
And so I was recruited for this job. Someone out of LA recommended me to the recruiter who were looking for someone. And it was kind of magical the way it happened, because I hadn't checked my LinkedIn in forever. Who checks LinkedIn? But I was like, okay, well, let me look for a job. I'm like, I'm going to look for other jobs in LA. And I went on there and I had a message from June, and they were like, oh, we're hiring for this theater. And so I wrote him back and I said, hey, I'm just now seeing this. It's August. You probably hired someone, but if you ever want to consider me for another future job, no, I'm interested. And he's like, no, 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 we haven't hired anyone. And within 2 days, I had an interview. And within 4 days, they flew me down here to do an in-person interview and tour. And on my way home from the airport, they told me they were offering me the job. And 2 weeks later, we moved here.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it kind of happened. Really. So yeah, that's what brought me here. But if the job wasn't amazing, I mean, this is my dream job, to be an executive artistic director of a theater in a community that I actually really like, in a city that I can raise my kids safely with good schools, closer to my family, and where I get to make the artistic choices and help to be a model for what the American theater can be. It's a lot of pressure I'm putting on myself, but I'm like, I just have to believe that this is the right way. Inclusion, diversity, this can happen. I know it can. And so now I get to try out all those theories that I was having. Oh no, I hope my computer doesn't die.
I'm just like so in awe, like how it just like all worked out. But I'm just like so I just like love hearing that they're like people like you are there, like out there, like really doing it, like like not just saying like we're gonna make change, but like no, we're gonna make the changes. It just makes me so happy.
We're trying.
Yeah.
I'm canceling shows. I'm getting hate mail.
But it's like there has to be those strong individuals out there that are making those changes, for future development and stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that's amazing. So I guess like more about the company, and just how do you guys go about creating new works, and the development of new works, and what are central themes? I guess now I know you said you wanted to make the whole Latinx is universal as like one of the big themes, but
yeah,
what else is like something that you want as a central thing in the new works, and how are new works brought about in the
so it's interesting that you ask that. Do you know what the Kilroys are?
No, I do not.
Google it. So we're basically like a guerrilla activist group of ladies in the theater trying to achieve gender equity. Sorry, I need to plug in my computer.
No, that's totally good.
Walking around with the thing. There were some really famous playwrights and like literary agents and stuff who started it. And then a few years ago, they added some more members, and I'm a member now. And we basically make the argument for like, hey, there's tons of women, non-binary, trans playwrights out there. No excuse. We're going to make a list every year to show you who they are so that you can start producing them. So that's something that I do on the side, like a passion activist project. Pardon me. When I started my job, everyone told me this city only likes big musicals. And I was like, I like big musicals too, but that's not all of theater.
Yeah.
And that's not going to get us more people coming to the theater that haven't already come, because not everybody likes musicals. I know that is not true for anybody. Like, you cannot tell me a whole city likes musicals. Like, I know I can name you 15 family members that I have in San Antonio that do not like musicals.
Yeah.
And or friends. And so I said, so when I came in, I said, I want us to try some new works. So we do still produce not new works. We produce, especially this season, because I didn't pick this season,
Yeah.
shows that have already been done. But what I'm looking at for next season are some traditional musicals that people are going to be able to say, okay, we still get our musicals. But I'm also going, okay, how can I transition them into a different kind of theater as opposed to just trying to burn everything down? Because I want them to stay on this ride with me. I want to show them that it still can happen. So I'm looking at plays that have already been done that have music or musicals that maybe are newer, but not completely new. And I'm also looking for new musicals. But because I'm a Kilroy, the Kilroys, we really challenge theaters to produce 50% women non-binary trans playwrights. So I'm really trying to do that with the season. It's really hard with musicals because musicals are still so man driven. But I have found some new musicals written by women, and there's some that I want to develop for later. So the way I go about it is just constantly keeping my pulse on who the new playwrights are and what those new plays are, and networking. And the Kilroys helps too, because half of the Kilroys are playwrights, so I can reach out to them or get their plays. But we internally have a new play development group that has sort of been on pause for a few years. And one of the things I'm working on in January is figuring out what that program looks like so that we can start it back again and potentially commission new plays. But also, how do we start featuring and discovering local playwrights and stories regionally in South Texas? And then they could also be the ones that are essentially doing the research to find the new works that we bring on board.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. I really like the inclusivity of different kinds of playwrights and people involved, which is very important if we want to move a certain direction
Yeah.
in the future. Um, More of a general question, I guess. Um, what does it mean to be Latina to you? And what does it mean to have this identity of being Latina?
Oh, I mean,
Very
for
broad,
me,
I know.
I know. For me specifically, I live at the intersection of Latin Latino-ness and my Americanness, because I grew up in the US and in Texas. And also Texas has its own identity, having been Mexico and then Texas itself as its own country, and then it became the US. So growing up here, I feel like I was always straddling both sides of partly being American. And then, I'm fluent in Spanish. I grew up mariachi singing. My family's still half in Mexico. The way I participate in relationships and friendships is still very Latino. But if you ask my Mexican cousins if I was Mexican or American, they would say I was American.
Yeah.
So there's just sort of this, for me, being Latina is connecting with the traditions and the history of my ancestors. And now for me, as I'm decolonizing my life, my work, my art, the way I parent, the way I eat, I'm starting to actually get more connected with my actual indigenous roots and identify with those. And what does that mean when I bring that back into my life? Because it was lost after centuries of colonization. And I think what it means to be Latina and Latino and Latinx is so different. I mean, I can't define that for anyone else, but for me, it's that constant relationship with the heritage, the culture, and the history. And then for me personally, Claudia, it's how I'm a public servant to others like me and what I can do to help and uplift my own community.
Beautiful. Yeah. I think it's really important that last part you said as well, like uplifting those that are like me. I think it's great to have people who are representation figures that like you that can show that you can do these works and you can, be a strong individual, because I feel like oftentimes at least as far as I know, a lot of my friends who are Latinas were just like, we didn't have any representation figures growing up. So I think that's amazing. I guess I wanted to also ask, are there any specific people in your life that have helped you stay grounded in this identity of being a Latina woman?
You know, gosh, it's been really hard for me because I think, growing up in Texas with my parents, they worked, they grew up here in the 60s and 70s. They worked so hard to assimilate.
Mm-hmm.
And they were also members of, an evangelical Christian church. And I feel like that made them assimilate towards whiteness a lot more, to
Yeah.
belong in that. And yet I still had all this Mexican culture, but it's like they were always also sliding us away to some degree.
Mhm.
And then I moved to Minnesota, and then I just felt like I was alone when I went to acting school, and which is why I moved to California.
Yeah.
But then California, as you've experienced, is not the inclusive paradise that people think it is. And I felt shut out by the Latinx community there for a while. Like I didn't quite fit in. And so I kept having these women and some men who would pop in my life for like a hot minute, but then also it would be bad. So it's hard for me to identify someone that's been a through line. I would say most recently, my partner Aurora, who owns the agency that I was working at for the past year, that relationship sort of gave me a renewed sense of being grounded in who we are and how we use that moving forward, and that partnership with her. But she was the first deep Latina friendship that I made in my 15 years in LA.
Yeah.
And now I find that I'm making those friends here and those relationships here in San Antonio because it's a different environment. But I mean, I would say to some degree, my mother root was that grounding me in my culture because she stuck us in mariachi band, and she's the one who, you know, she's the one who cooks our food, and that's all Mexican food. So all the cultural things, certainly my mom, has always been that touchstone. But I would say that this experience of moving back and forth between Latinidad and American has always been this tug of war with me. And what I'm trying to do is to identify it as a benefit. How can I recognize that maybe that's what puts me in a really great position to lead my organization? Because it's a primarily white institution.
Yeah.
But they're trying to connect with the Latino community, which is the city's, like I said, majority Latino. So I think I think they interviewed some folks who were very much into Latinidad, and that scared them. And I think that's a shame because that's their own internal racism that's scaring them. I'm not saying that's okay, but I think, coming across me helped them bridge that divide, because I was someone that said, I understand you, but we have to change it.
Yeah.
And maybe some people look at that and say that that's, I don't know, selling out. I don't think it is, because I know what my own identity is and that I'm staying true to it.
Yeah.
But I do think that I have a different lived experience that included, being Texan and living in the Midwest for a bit. And that's that.
I think it's great because you're pulling from both sides, and there's so many other people out there that are in that same boat as you and probably feel the same way. And so
Or they probably feel ashamed to like admit it. Because I had a friend who came to me. She's half Indian, half Mexican. She's one of my best friends from high school. She lives in LA now. And she was like, I don't know if I should audition for this Latinx monologue competition. And I was like, of course you should. And she said, but I don't think I'm I mean, you don't consider me Latino, do you? And I said, of course I do, but it's not about what I consider you. It's what do you identify with? She's like, well, I'm half Mexican. I said, audition. No one can tell you that you're not, a Latina. But I think there's a sense of you have to be like the Boyle Heights, Gentefied, Vida, those TV shows. That's Latino.
Yeah.
And I didn't grow up that way. So I like that we're doing those shows, but I never identified with them.
Yeah. I think
And
it's,
maybe that's part, yeah.
no, continue.
No, that's it. I think that's just partly why it was hard for me in LA, because that was what their understanding of what Latino was.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say it's like people telling you what it means to be you. And I've noticed that a lot with me living here for the past 4 years in college. When I tell people where I'm from or whatever, they're like, but you don't, you don't look like that. But you don't. And it's like people telling me what I'm meant to be, and it puts you in this confusion where you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I guess I don't know. Like maybe I should not go for that. Maybe that's not me. And we in class we also talked about a lot of Afro Latinx people where they're like, well, you're not Latino enough, or you're not Black enough, or
Yeah.
and it puts them in just like this, okay, well, I am both. Why do I need to be one or the other? And I guess for you as well, why do you need to be either American or Latina? You're both, and both are incredibly valid and meaningful experiences to your work. But yeah, I guess it's just like a lot of people telling you what you're meant to be. And especially when I guess you're younger, that gets to your head. And I totally understand. Yeah.
It does get to your head and it fucks you up. I for years wondered where I fit in, and I didn't quite know. And then I think it was maybe the last, I think it was being with my husband, because then I was living with someone so intimately relative. My myself was relative to his whiteness, for lack of a better way of putting it. So then I was like, oh no, I really like this Latino-ness is really standing out now, right? Now I am Latino. And that helped me sort of ground myself in my identity a little bit more. But then it meant that I was constantly facing these things, like auditioning for a play in LA where I was told I wasn't Mexican enough because I didn't look a certain way, even though I'm like, I'm literally 100% Mexican.
Yeah.
But, or like, I was being interviewed to coach a really big movie with a big celebrity. And I had spent a really long time talking on the phone to the producer about my methods and blah, blah, blah. And by the way, the accent was for East Texas, where I grew up. So I'm like, of course I can coach this. I grew up there. Like, this is fine. And at the end of the conversation, he's like, so I'm sorry, I have to ask, but you're Latina. Can you coach an American accent? And I was like, who do you, didn't we just talk for the last like 20 minutes?
Uh,
And aren't you hearing my accent?
yeah.
And also I have the not, but because I'm Latina, you think I can't. And I didn't get that job. And you know what? I didn't want that job because every day I'd be having to prove how American I was. And I'm like, what do I need to do? Wear a flag? You need me to dye my hair blonde? Like, what do you need me to eat hot dogs and hamburgers for lunch every day? Like,
Yeah.
I was like, I don't, that's bullshit. So yeah, we certainly can live at the intersection. I think the US is just now understanding that because they're dealing with seeing color again. They went forever being colorblind, and now we're like, no, 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 there's color. So now they're like seeing color. And quite frankly, they have to, because Black Latinos get erased and Indigenous people get erased, and Asian American people get erased, and all the different parts of Asia, the South Asian, East Asian. And I think we have to see those differences now and their beauty and what they contribute before we can start seeing the intersection. But I think that change is happening.
No, yeah, I completely agree. It goes back to what you said in the beginning. Who decides who gets to speak English in this country?
Yeah.
And it's just wild. um, but I guess like this is like kind of my last question, where it's like, what is your personal like mission statement about being a woman and a woman of color in the theater industry, and what is some piece of advice you can give to other aspiring Latina artists?
I would say that for me personally, my mission is to be part of the long tradition and human experience of telling stories in order to connect and enhance our experience as people and humans that coexist with each other. And for me, that's by being deliberate and conscious in my practice as a theater artist and leader, in hopes that I can, at the very least, make incremental change, but hopefully big change, so that more and more people can be included and represented in that age-old tradition of telling stories.
That's amazing. Um, and then what is some advice you could give to aspiring Latina artists?
My advice would be to keep persistence, that when it feels like it's not going to happen or it's falling apart, that it's really pushing ahead and being the one that lasts, that matters. And also that at some point, not just for Latinas, but for all women of color and for women and for people of color, the industry, theater, TV, film, the arts are about people hiring people they like and know. And it's understandable because it's intimate. We get really intimate in theater really fast, and you have to spend a lot of time with people. And it's a different kind of work than working in an office. And sometimes it is hard to separate personal and professional. And so people hire their friends or people they've known. And at some point, we can be the people we know for each other.
Yeah.
So the more we connect with each other and collaborate with each other, and then also as we move up, uplift each other and bring people with us, the better it's going to set the stage for all of us, even to be more successful and have more representation.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think with it being intimate work, I think like just creating good connections and relations with each other is really important.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of all the questions I had lined up for the interview. And I'm so glad. This is truly just amazing, like all the things I got to hear from you. Um, but yeah, I just want to thank you again so much for helping me out and being a part of this project. I
Thank
hope you have
you.
a great rest of your day, and I hope you feel better.
Thank you very much. We'll talk soon.
Yes. All right. Bye.
Bye.